So you're on your fourth watch of Stranger Things, or listening to The Adventure Zone, or tuning into Critical Role, and you think, hey, this Dungeons & Dragons thing looks pretty fun. But before you're ready to get a party together, you gotta ask yourself, who's running this thing? And that's where the Game Master, or Dungeon Master if you're nasty, comes in. Now, there's a pretty big difference between running a campaign well and running one pretty badly. And we're gonna find out what that is today on Indi Android.
So Dungeons & Dragons is of course, the first and the oldest role-playing game. It's the original role-playing game. So when people say Dungeons & Dragons, or they say D&D, let's go play some D&D, a lot of times they mean Dungeons & Dragons itself, like the modern edition. A lot of times they mean an older edition. Sometimes they mean one of the many spin-offs or offshoots of Dungeons & Dragons. But when people say D&D, it can mean a lot more than just the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons.
Say they walk into a store like this one or something like Barnes & Noble and they see the wall of D&D books.
Yeah.
Where do they start with that?
Best place to start is just get either a starter set or a player's handbook, and that'll get you going. Either one of those. If you're brand new and you've never played at all, I would definitely recommend the starter set. It's a very good bargain. It'll have everything you need in it. If you want to go full out and get just the 3 main books, that would be like 3 $50 books, but that alone, you don't really need anything else. Everything else is completely optional. With just those 3 books, you could probably play for thousands and thousands of hours. So it's actually a fairly good bargain. The role of the Dungeon Master has changed sort of over the years. It dates back all the way to the turn of the century, where you had games such as Little Wars, which was created by and played by H.G. Wells. And it was like a war game, right, with miniatures. And there was this referee or umpire that would sit and watch the game and would make ruling calls and judgment calls. And that sort of continued into the 60s and the 70s, the early 70s, and then a game by Gary Gygax, Chainmail, came out, and that was the predecessor to Dungeons & Dragons. And it was originally just a war game, where you just had miniatures, and it was kind of birthed out of these old Napoleonics from the 70s that war gamers would play back then. And somebody had the idea that, what if we just played a war game, but we only controlled one person instead of a whole army? And that kind of birthed Dungeons & Dragons, and it very much kept the role of like the neutral referee, the judge, the kind of the arbitrator of the game that is just overseeing things and saying like, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do this. But also just kind of over time, they've also kind of taken the role of constructing a world and creating like a setting and an environment for players to interact with.
Everybody sees a beautiful unicorn appear, and it seems kind of like sparkling and almost like ethereal. And yes.
What makes a good GM?
It differs for different games and for different groups. I think no 2 groups would answer the question the same way, but there are some pretty universal things, such as just making sure everybody has a good time, making sure you know what the players want and doing what they want to do. If you want to run this one specific kind of game and none of your players are interested in it, it's not going to work out. You're not going to have the right chemistry. You have to just talk with them, figure out what they want to do, find something that sounds fun where everyone's going to have a good time and do that. Make sure everybody gets their own time at the table. It's easy, especially when you have a bigger group, that one of the players is just sitting there and they're being quiet all night and they're not really doing anything. Trying to get them involved and them interested is probably the best thing you could do to improve yourself as like a DM. Is make sure everybody gets their time in the spotlight. Don't ever enforce a rule that is going to make everyone miserable, and don't ever come up with your own ruling that makes them miserable. Right? Yeah.
Trying to find the balance between sticking to the script of the campaign, whether you wrote it or it's a pre-written one, and letting your players improvise. Where do you see that balance?
Well, I'm definitely in favor of the players improvising. I'm actually not a huge fan of creating like a huge like story arc as the Dungeon Master. I am more of a fan of creating just a setting and a bunch of interesting locales, and that the story is emergent. It's like emergent gameplay where players are playing, and then through play you have a story that's created that wasn't planned, that wasn't, you didn't take notes in advance on, then the bad guy is going to jump out here, right? It's all done just through play of what the players want to do, and the story just kind of emerges from their actions and what they choose to do in the universe.
What's your sales pitch for a game of D&D?
I think honestly you can just, as long as you can get them to the table, I think there's not much else you have to do. I think most people, the best way to get them playing is to just drop them in front of a dungeon and just say, here's your character. You can do anything you could do in real life, plus you can also do these other things, and have at it. Go in there, try to get some treasure, try to kill some monsters. I think that's the best way to introduce players to the game. I think teaching them the rules and kind of explaining the this and that or whatever is not going to be as helpful as just like sitting them down and just being like, okay, here's what we're doing. There's a lot of other like small indie companies that are making their own games that are just kind of like off-brand D&D right now, and some of them are really, really good. But there's a lot of good sci-fi ones. There's a lot out there, but D&D is just so king right now. It's especially right now because of things like Critical Role that you said earlier. Stuff like that has just really blown D&D up, and it's actually probably more popular now than it has been since probably the like mid-'80s.
And that's a cool thing, right?
Yeah.
It's good to have more people on?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. More people is always better.
So whether you're rushing out to pick up 5e or there's another game that catches your eye, you are now more than ready to lead your party to victory. That, or to make their lives miserable. Just bring plenty of snacks. Huge thanks to the Game Preserve for having us. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have an idea for an episode or a question about geek culture that you want answered, drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.